So our first speaker is Mike Simmons, as we've been alluding to a little bit. He's an incident management and preparedness advisor for U.S. Coast Guard District 8, which is a huge, big old area that takes up the whole center of the country. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it. He's going to be providing an overview of existing pollution laws, regulations, and plans, along with the agency's roles and responsibilities.
Good morning, everyone. How many people thought that icebreaker survey was the best thing ever? That's the first time I've ever done one of those real time, and oh my goodness, I got to get access to that. That's great. I can't say enough about NOAA Sea Grant program, what they do, how they are a great collaborator in bridging that gap between federal and state down to the local level, NGOs, interested parties, affected parties. And I've had the pleasure of opening this workshop up in Houma, Louisiana back in December. And I'm glad to be here today to close out this very effective seminar workshop. This is what I'm going to talk about in less than 20 minutes. So it's a lot to get to, but I am going to be part of a panel for Q&A. And then I will unfortunately have to leave at the end of our break, our first break. So if you have any burning questions, issues, or concerns, please seek me out. A little bit about the vast 8th Coast Guard District. There are 9 Coast Guard districts throughout the country. And no, we don't use all the numbers from 1 to 9. We kind of jump around a little bit. But the 8th Coast Guard District is right here in the middle. It includes all or parts of 26 states from border to border, basically the entire Western Rivers watershed, the Ohio, Mississippi, Missouri, Arkansas, so on and so forth. And of course, we go out 200 miles through the exclusive economic zone to our border, maritime border with Mexico to the south. So a lot of diversity there. Of course, our Coast Guard headquarters is in Washington, D.C. We have 2 area commands. This all here east of the Rockies is Atlantic area out of Portsmouth, Virginia. And west is the Pacific area out of Alameda, California. And again, we have 9 Coast Guard districts. The Gulf of Mexico, as it breaks down, we have these captain of the port zones. So every part of the waterway throughout the country is broken down by defined captain of the port zones. One thing I want to point out here, this is the entire Gulf of Mexico, but not all the Gulf of Mexico is within the 8th Coast Guard District. We do share that with our 7th Coast Guard District out of Miami, Florida, and Mobile. This right here effectively is the border between the 7th District and the 8th Coast Guard District. Okay, so that's how it shakes down in the Gulf of Mexico. And again, all of those goes out to the end of our exclusive economic zone. So what I really want to talk to you about is provide you that umbrella overview of what currently exists. Because we found out as time goes on that a lot of people don't necessarily understand what is currently out there and the different roles, responsibilities, authorities, and jurisdictions. So 2 broad laws that we all draw from when you're talking about pollution, planning, preparedness, and response is the Clean Water Act, last updated with the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, and the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, better known as Superfund. So those are the 2 broad laws, statutes on the books, enacted by Congress, signed by the President years ago, that provide the entire framework for what we do, how we do it. And the document that synthesizes that statutes, those 2 statutes, is the National Contingency Plan. That's a regulation. So 40 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 300 is the National Contingency Plan. That National Contingency Plan been delegated from the President to the Environmental Protection Agency. So they own that process. They own the National Contingency Plan and the updating of those regulations. But within those regulations, it provides the framework by which the Coast Guard or the EPA and others do the work of pollution planning, preparedness, and response. A main tenet of the whole system is the national response system. And it is divided into, you got national, you have federal, state, local entities. Basically, it's the whole resources within the country is part of the national response system, can be used, implemented to respond to a pollution incident. It's really that broad. Just a different graphic here that breaks it down, and I'm going to talk about the national response team, the regional response teams, the distinctions, the differences, but just wanted to talk here about state, local governments, special teams, and of course, the regulated industry. We must not forget about that, because there again, if you go back to the statute, the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, I heard some people during the Deepwater Horizon event, Macondo, BP, however you want to call that massive response spill back in April of 2010, people were questioning, why is BP involved in the response? Why is the Coast Guard and the states and the EPA working with BP? Why? Simply because the law says that's what we're supposed to do. The responsible party is supposed to be responsible. We want them to be responsible, and we need them at the table to spend their money to effect a effective, efficient cleanup. So that's one. Now, let's go back at the top, and we're going to work our way down the food chain, if you will. The National Response Team. That is not really a response team, but they are a national level planning policy body headed up by the EPA. The EPA is or serves as the chair of the National Response Team. It's made up of 15 federal agencies and departments within the U.S. And the Coast Guard serves as the vice chair. Now, words and terms do matter, but that is what the NRT is basically made up to do. Now we can bring that down to the regional response team level. There are 13 regional response teams throughout the country. All right, there's 10 regions, plus Caribbean has their own regional response team, Oceania has theirs, and Alaska has theirs. All right, so those are the 10 federal regions. Just a quick note here, the EPA and FEMA follow that structure. Other agencies do not, and the Coast Guard definitely does not. So we have a lot of overlap, for example, within the 8th Coast Guard District. But that's the breakdown. Think of it this way. It's the same 15 federal agencies that are members of the National Response Team. We add in the states within that region, and tribal interests are encouraged to participate. And at the regional level, it is a co-chair responsibility between the EPA and the Coast Guard. So at the NRT, you have EPA as the chair, Coast Guard as the vice chair. At the regional level, it's a co-chair. So co-equal branches, if you will. Civics lesson here. So in the 8th Coast Guard District, one of my duties is I serve as the co-chair for the regional response team for Region 6, 7, and 8. We have 8 Coast Guard District units, field units, that really do the work. That's where the rubber meets the road. We have 8 Coast Guard districts that are in Region 4, 3, and 5. So hopefully by now you've figured out that you are sitting in Mobile, Alabama, which is Region 4. So why am I here talking to you if I'm from the 8th District? Well, simply, Sector Mobile is an 8th Coast Guard District Field Command, and my counterpart in the 7th Coast Guard District in Miami, he serves as the co-chair for the Coast Guard for Regional Response Team 4. He was unable to be here. Quicker drive from me to get here from New Orleans than for him to come up from Miami. So that's why I'm here speaking to you today. So at the regional level, again, we don't respond per se. We focus on that regional level planning preparedness, and we do provide assistance to a federal on-scene coordinator during a response, as requested, as needed. Other than the colors, this graphic here comes straight out of the National Contingency Plan. And this is just a visual depiction of how everything works, what's currently out there and how it works. So of course, the National Response Team, they are responsible for producing and updating the National Contingency Plan. Again, that's codified in regulations, 40 CFR Part 300. Just so you know, that was last updated in 1994. So it is post OPA 90, but it has not been updated recently, but still valid. Under that, you've got the regional response teams are responsible for developing, maintaining, exercising the regional contingency plans. So each region has a regional contingency plan. And under that, area contingency plans. A lot of people say that is the foundation. That's why it's, center, bottom of this graphic. That is the foundation for oil planning, preparedness, and response. There are, I think, 37 defined captain of the ports throughout the country. The Coast Guard is the chair of coastal area committees, and the division between coastal and inland is negotiated per each EPA region and that Coast Guard district. So that's where we define where that line of demarcation is between the coastal zone and the inland zone. Then, of course, here you see you've got vessel response plans, facility response plans, and just a quick reminder, facility response plans also include outer continental shelf for the Gulf of Mexico, oil and gas exploration and production. Those plans fall under facility response plans. You have the term of long, skinny facilities, pipelines, those have response plans. So all of those are called or under the oversight of facility response plans. You have other federal agency plans and, of course, state and local plans, including the local emergency planning committees. So here you have international joint plans, and since the 8th district, we border with the country of Mexico. There is a joint contingency plan between the United States and Mexico, and we have a Gulf Annex. So I also serve as the chair of that Mexis Gulf group. And hopefully many of you, if not all, are fully aware of the National Response Framework, last updated in June of 2016. That's how we deal with the vast bulk of disasters, think floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, so on and so forth, FEMA-led, state requested. I'm going to talk a little bit more as we get toward the end of the presentation about the compare and contrast the National Contingency Plan and Oil Pollution Act of 1990 as opposed to the Stafford Act, National Response Framework. So that's how it's currently organized, and it works pretty well. One point I want to talk about for the area contingency plans. Again, the first word here is important, areas. It's not a Coast Guard plan. They're not named Coast Guard unit whatever. For example, here in Sector Mobile, which the captain of the port of Mobile, now Captain LaDon Allen, she serves as the pre-designated federal on-scene coordinator for the coastal zone and is responsible for chairing and development, implementation, exercising of that coastal area contingency plan. The coastal area contingency plan under Sector Mobile's oversight and leadership is Mississippi, Alabama, and Northwest Florida Area Committee and Area Contingency Plan. So it is geographic based to remind everyone that it's not a Coast Guard plan. Coast Guard does serve as the chair, the states serve as co-chair. A lot of others participate in that process, but that's how the system works. It's the statute calls out that each area contingency plan is supposed to be adequate to respond to a worst case discharge scenario, be that from any mode of transportation. Pre-Deepwater Horizon, Coast Guard was pretty good at vessel worst case discharge and fixed facilities. We kind of lost sight of the Gulf of Mexico outer continental shelf though. We have shored up that gap since 2010, I can assure you. But it's taking a look at all of the modes of transportation within that coastal captain of the port zone and making sure that you have that identified in your plan and the plan is suitable to respond to that worst case discharge scenario. The area contingency plan is not a recipe for how to bake a great cake though. It's not a point by point, it's more notional, talks about the overall concepts, organization, flow of the response, doesn't overly duplicate what's currently existing in the National Contingency Plan, which also lays out the flow of a response. But it's got a lot of information in there, but you don't pick it up and start going through in a systematic fashion to get from point A to point B. A lot of people talk about, as we had our icebreaker this morning, 63 reported spills where there was a response since May of 2018 within the Gulf of Mexico. So how does that whole process work? Well, luckily, again, this, other than the color added, this graphic comes straight from the National Contingency Plan. So an incident occurs, and of course, in the statute and in the regulations, if you are a owner, operator, person in charge of a vessel or facility, when you have a discharge of oil or a release of hazardous substances into the water, impacting the water, you are mandated by law to make that notification. One call, that's all, National Response Center. All right, so we've got some people here who know what I'm talking about. That's not copyrighted, I hope. But 1-800-424-8802 is the National Response Center. They take care of, that's your one-stop shop for any reported discharge or release anywhere in the country. It comes in there, they take the information down, they look at their map, and they sort out who is the pre-designated federal on-scene coordinator, be it EPA for the inland zone or the Coast Guard, captain of the port, for the coastal zone. They get that information out to the field, and then they have to determine, is a federal response required? If the responsible party is taking action, if potentially the state or local is out there, a trusted agency is out there overseeing that, that's a good thing. We don't always have to respond and show up. The Coast Guard, honestly, our policy internally is that we do show up a lot more than not. Here, tie into the natural resource trustees. If we want to make sure that they're aware of the spill and if there's any potential impact to federally listed threatened or endangered species. Then it comes down, if there is a federal response, if there's going to be a cleanup, then you organize by unified command, primarily made up by the on-scene coordinator, state, local, tribal, and the responsible party, again. And off to the side here, you see the regional response teams, and the national response team stands ready to provide assistance as needed. So that's how the flow works each and every time. Okay, some of you may not be aware of the Preparedness for Response Exercise Program. That also was a big improvement from when OPA 90 was written into law in August of 1990. 4 agencies sign off on that: U.S. Coast Guard, Environmental Protection Agency, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, the old Minerals Management Service under the Department of the Interior, and U.S. Department of Transportation, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA, for pipelines. So those are the 4 agencies that get together and develop, maintain these PREP guidelines. They are guidelines. They're not law. They're not regulations. However, the PREP guidelines in their current form, which is 2016.1 edition, that does meet the intent of the regulations. And I don't know of any operator doing business in the country that does not follow the PrEP guidelines. So that takes you through the process, whether you're doing a tabletop exercise or a full-scale area exercise. I mentioned this earlier. So that is the breakdown. But here's two things I want to show you or to tell you about the key distinction between National Contingency Plan and Stafford Act. And I will use the example of Hurricane Michael last October that had impact on the panhandle of Florida. Key thing is for Stafford, for Oil Pollution Act of 1990, NCP response, OPA has a mandate for cost recovery. So that's why we prefer that states request federal assistance to come in and assist them post-presidential natural disaster declaration to mitigate the pollution from vessels. And we aren't talking about commercial vessels. Commercial vessels always are responsible, and they need to take care of any discharge or release that comes from them. We're talking about the smaller vessels. But if we were to respond under our existing authorities, then we would have to go back and seek cost recovery from those individuals, boat owners, and that's not good. So we don't want to do that. Luckily, we have never had to do that. We do work with the states. The states have to ask for federal assistance, be it Coast Guard or the EPA, to come in and help. It's not business as usual. You have a lot of volume. You have hundreds, if not thousands, of vessels displaced throughout an area that need to be addressed. The other key thing is there is no cost share for the state for a national contingency plan-led response. There is for Stafford Act. The entering argument, FEMA tells you every year, is 25% state cost share. That can be negotiated down depending on the specifics of the storm and politics, to be honest with you. But the entering argument is 25% state cost share. They should be prepared to pay for that. Other than that, there are several nuances, differences between an NCP response and the Stafford Act response. They can exist co-equally, by the way. Some improvements since Deepwater Horizon. One is me standing here before you. This job was created after Deepwater Horizon. Each of the 9 Coast Guard districts got one of me, so that's a good thing, and I'm here. The relationship with the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement in the Coast Guard, specifically in the Gulf Coast, has definitely gotten a lot better. Of course, we had a full-time Coast Guard Incident Management Assist team, about 33 people strong out of Virginia. That was created. Before Deepwater Horizon, we didn't have capping stack. Now we do. So a lot of good things did come from that horrible environmental disaster, but we have a long way to go. So key takeaways. There is a well-defined system. All right, I want people to know that it's not willy-nilly. It's not, you know, well, who does this? We do have structure, and it's backed by law and regulation. So we're not making stuff up on the fly. Each incident is unique. Deepwater Horizon was the first time that we used subsea dispersant injection, for example. That doesn't happen every day, but I would say that that's a one-off. Deepwater Horizon, in many respects, was an anomaly. Hopefully, we don't have another one. If we do, we are better positioned to respond more efficiently, effectively if we had one, but we would prefer to focus our time and talents on prevention first and foremost. But all of you have an opportunity to participate either at the local level, at the area committee level, but I also want to remind people or give you the option to go to a semi-annual regional response team meeting because time is money and a lot of resources are slim during this time. So if you go to a regional response team, you have access to those Captain of the Port representatives, so you can potentially get a lot more bang for your buck doing the regional response team as opposed to going to each of the area committee meetings. But area committee is at that foundation level, and I would never discourage anyone from going to an area committee meeting. that's a great place to plug in. And again, two predominantly lead federal agencies, EPA for the inland zone and the Coast Guard for the coastal zone. And that's my contact information. If you don't get me today, if you have any other questions, comments, issues, or concerns, don't hesitate to let me know. And thank you for your time.